2021, the American Freethought movement lost one of its genuine heroes when Tom Flynn, editor of Free Inquiry magazine, director of the Robert Greene Ingersoll Birthplace Museum and the Freethought Trail, and the former executive director of the Council for Secular Humanism, died very unexpectedly at the age of 66. A stark rationalist and staunch atheist, he was the beating heart of the Center for Inquiry and indeed the wider free thought movement. Firm in his secular humanist principles and buoyant with enthusiasm for the subjects he loved, defiant in the face of irrational dogma and magical thinking, while also warm, welcoming, and bursting with good humor, even inventing his curmudgeonly character of Anti-Claus to talk about what he saw as the trouble with Christmas as a federal holiday and society celebration. Thorn in the side of the nuns at St. George's Catholic School in Erie, Pennsylvania in the early 1970s, flowering into a fragrant rose at Cincinnati's Jesuit Xavier University, where the school's emphasis on philosophy and theology gave him what he needed to pursue his religious question at a more serious level, and also a founder there of the superhero-like Appalachian Social Justice Committee. Over several years of inquiry, Tom Flynn rejected his Catholicism, then his Christianity, and ultimately his theism altogether. Tom moved to Buffalo in New York in 1981, this is a little overlap, to work as an industrial filmmaker and advertising account executive, and also began to do volunteer work for the Council for Democratic and Secular Humanism, Kodesh as it was called then, the publisher of Free Inquiry magazine. 3 years later, he resolved to stop celebrating Christmas, saying it was no longer the birthday of anyone I know. Since then, he always chose to work on Christmas. Tom joined the staff of Kodesh, later an affiliate of the Center for Inquiry in 1989. The following year, the Free Inquiry Group was founded in Cincinnati, comprised largely of subscribers to Free Inquiry. FIG's first public meeting was attended by what I came to regard as the three horsemen of inquiry: Paul Kurtz, Tim Madigan, and Tom Flynn. In 2000, following the death of Paul Kurtz, Tom became the editor of Free Inquiry, and in 2009 was named executive director of the Council of Secular Humanism, as Kodesh has been known since 1996. Perhaps best known widely as the author of The Trouble with Christmas, as well as several anti-religious Black comedy science fiction novels collectively known as the Messiah trilogy, Tom gave his first public presentation of The Trouble with Christmas as a paper at a FIG meeting. Tom was a great friend to FIG, flying down to Cincinnati numerous times for our various events. One I remember particularly was a conference in celebration of the 1000th anniversary of the Rubaiyat by Omar Khayyam, replete with mother and daughter belly dancers and an entire hotel kitchen staff trained to produce a Persian feast. Knowing Tom was coming made you want to do no less. A quality of Tom's I most admired and related to was his willingness to embrace silliness and seriousness almost simultaneously, with neither detracting from the other, to be both playful and profound, respecting the value of both. It was just 2 days before his unexpected death at 66, Tom confirmed his intention to be here to deliver a specially updated More Trouble with Christmas just for FIG. It was a singular honor that Tom wanted to do this in person. The least we can do is honor him in his absence. I'd just like to say personally that I valued Tom's friendship and presence as a leading secular humanist in our country and as a human being. He held a special affection for FIG, came several times to participate in FIG events. He joined Kodesh the same year FIG was created, largely among, well, I'm repeating myself, subscribers to Free Inquiry magazine, hence our name, the Free Inquiry Group. And he attended our very first public meeting in Cincinnati, which actually may have been in Newport, in Norwood, but it was our first public meeting. Tom's hero, Robert Greene Ingersoll, once wrote, "A great man does not seek applause or place. He seeks for truth. He seeks the road to happiness, and what he ascertains, he gives to others." And as Edward Kabash, the chair of the Center for Inquiry, says, The best way we can honor Tom's memory and all the magnificent work that he did is to continue to devote ourselves to ending religious bigotry anywhere and everywhere. We're privileged to have with us tonight Connie Skingel. Do I pronounce that correctly?
Skingel.
Skingel. Yeah. The development officer at the Center for Inquiry, who will tell us about some of the projects Tom initiated and was still working on, like the Ingersoll Birthplace Museum and the Freethought Trail, and whatever else she can think of, and show us some videos of the testimonials presented at Tom's memorial at Amherst, and maybe, well, it says here, maybe she even brought a couple copies of Tom's science fiction novels. I know that didn't happen. Few of us have ever seen them or even know about them, but they would be fun. But you're going to tell us the names of a few of them.
They're available on Amazon, so yes.
And Amazon has them, right? We also have a friend and classmate of Tom's at Xavier, Ray Lebowski, with us. Perhaps others who wish to speak. There are also current and former figures who knew Tom. One of whom I know has a lot to say is Bob Rieheman, who a founding member of FIG, or at least part of FIG in our very first year, I believe, and a former FIG president. Additionally, since Tom had planned to be FIG's presenter tonight to offer a new, improved, updated, more trouble with Christmas talk just for us, and in keeping with Ed Tabash's encouragement to action to honor Tom's memory, it seemed appropriate to ask our local anti-claus, Richard Ganulin, to contribute tonight's event. And he sent a letter to read. This is Richard Ganulin. Is Richard Ganulin the anti-claus? He took on the federal government over Christmas, and I think Tom would have been happy to have shared this event with him. But I'll do that later in the evening, and instead we'll go straight to Connie.
Thank you. I wish I could give you the more trouble with Christmas talk. We tried to find it on Tom's computer and in his files, and we had just no luck. So I think it might have been in his head still when he passed, but we're going to continue to look for it to see if we can find it for you and for others, because we think it's an important thing to track down. Let me bring up my slides. Let's move this out of the way for just a second. We are going to talk about Tom. There we go. All right. Sounds great, Phil. So I just wanted to thank you all of you, even those of you who are on Zoom and joining us. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. It really is an honor and a pleasure to have this opportunity to learn more about your group and to be in your company. I know Tom would have really loved to be here with you all tonight, and I recognize that I am a poor substitute. But truthfully, I think anyone would be, because Tom left impossible shoes for us to fill, just absolutely impossible. And he is dearly, dearly missed by all of us who knew him. There's just this big, big hole right at the heart at CFI, and I don't know how we go about making that pain go away. But for now, we are comforted by people like you, people who knew Tom or people who knew of Tom, and just want to take time to remember him with us. So thank you for tonight, and thank you for being a part of Tom's story. Tom's story actually started on August 18th of 1955 in Erie, Pennsylvania. He was born into a Catholic family. It was said that he was a really strong believer until his young adolescent years, when the Second Vatican Council met and he started to have doubts. As many of you know, he went to study at Xavier University here in Cincinnati. And like many of us in our college years, those years provided Tom with the tools he needed to really start to question those doubts. He began to explore his religious upbringing. He began to explore his doubts about God in a more serious way right here in Cincinnati. Eventually, Tom rejected Catholicism, and then he rejected theism entirely. In the 1980s, while he was living in Milwaukee, he went to the public library. He did a search in the card catalog for the word atheism, and he found the works of Robert Greene Ingersoll. And really, honestly, his life was just changed forever at that point. He read Ingersoll's speeches, and it confirmed for him that not only was he an atheist, but it also ignited for him a passion for becoming a public activist for unbelief. We're all better for it. So thank goodness that moment happened. Soon Tom found himself living in Buffalo. Here he is living his best life in Buffalo, New York. And he started volunteering for the Council for Democratic and Secular Humanism, which at the time was the name for CSH, and it published for Inquiry magazine. By 1989, he joined the staff officially. By 2000, he was the editor. And by 2009, he was named the executive director for the Council for Secular Humanism. The Council for Secular Humanism became Tom's home. And honestly, over time, it became difficult to even remember a time that that council existed without Tom at the helm. He was a workhorse and a larger-than-life presence. Some people even found him to be a bit intimidating, myself included, when I first met him. But those who knew him well knew that he had the biggest heart and just absolutely the hugest sense of humor to accompany his incredible intellect and sometimes gruff exterior. I want to show you an example of this. So sometime in 2013, a woman in Florida, and of course it's Florida, claimed to have seen a vision of the Holy Spirit in a goldfish cracker. You guys know what I'm talking about, these little goldfish crackers? It's absurd, of course. Even more so when I show you the image that she claimed was divine. That's what she thought was divine. She thought it was a crown. It looks like a Philip screw head to me, right? I mean, come on. Yes, just like Jesus right there. That's exactly the image we all have of Jesus. But Tom, who was never one to leave things to chance, decided to take matters into his own hands to ensure that no additional godly sightings were going to occur. Let's see if I can get this video to work for you because it's hilarious. Is there sound? Oh, wait, we don't have sound. Let me make sure we've got sound. We had sound a minute ago.
Okay, let me help you with sound. Share your screen.
Yeah.
It's going to share your screen.
Let me go back there. The beginning. Let's see if it comes through the speaker.
No,
Nope.
you have to tell it. You got that thing, picture screen to share?
Yeah.
There's a little box to the left that says share sound.
Okay, let's do escape. And let's do stop sharing, right?
Stop sharing.
We're going to do sharing again. There we go. All right, we're going to try this again, folks. This video is worth watching. Trust me on this. Let's see if this works. If not, we will go to plan B.
Tom, what are you doing? People say they get messages from God in these things.
One
I'm
second.
not taking any chances.
Tap down when the knife is here. Make sure. Let me go to my sound and make sure it's all the way up. Yep.
And Bluetooth it.
It's the Mormon speech we have a sound for, though, wasn't it?
Yes, the Mormons. Gotta love the Mormons.
Tom, what are you doing? People say they get messages from God in these things. I'm not taking any chances.
Can you hear any of that?
He said, I'm not taking any chances, he said, right?
All right, let's make sure we fix the sound because I have other videos and I don't want you to miss out on Tom talking. Let's see. How do we fix it?
It's just share sound from now on.
Okay, we should be good again. Okay. So make sure everyone on Zoom can hear us too. All right. Oops.
Tom, what are you doing?
There we go. Okay. So yes, I think you can see there, Tom was a good sport about everything. He was always willing to star in a silly video. Is it coming through the speaker? Am I coming through the speaker? I don't want to create an echo for you.
Yeah, it's not for me, but
Okay.
I'm just testing to make sure it's going well.
Okay. So this is what made Tom so special. Yes, he was, of course, the smartest man in the room, but he also had this just incredible willingness to have fun with us. He was willing to do just about anything that the CFI team asked of him. So this is a video of Tom tempting the fates.
Okay, good. Any particular God you want to call out?
Thor, I'm Thor with thee.
Okay. Okay, good.
So the next video I'm going to show you is my personal favorite. As many people in this room know all too well, Tom had a little trouble with Christmas. In fact, from what I understand, Tom came to the very first meeting in this group and talked about that subject.
Yeah, so we'll just leave it on for videos.
There we go.
Turn it on and off.
It should be fine. Yeah, we can adjust it. His most well-known writing is his book, The Trouble with Christmas, and he could be found each year on Christmas Day, live streaming from his office at CFI.
Close it up.
Oh goodness, what do we have here? Oh, speaker. Okay, we'll go away. There we go. In 1994, he was actually featured as an on-screen expert in the A&E biography's very first section on Santa Claus, and he was the only non-Greek Orthodox priest to be featured. He was booked as a folkologist or folklorist. There we go. And over time, he became known as the Anti-Claus, both in media circles and beyond those. Well, I have to tell you that none of Tom's efforts were well received by the big guy in the North Pole, and unfortunately, all of this Santa Claus, Anti-Claus tension came to a head one day in a park near Buffalo, New York, and I think you should just watch for yourselves. Get us on there, Peter. We will. Let's see. Perfect.
This has gone on far too long.
I agree.
Until we meet again.
I think this is just a great example of what a good sport Tom was and really just a fun person to work with. I mean, who else would do these types of things with you? Here we go. But of course, like all jobs, it wasn't all fun and games. Tom had work to do, and over the course of his incredible career, he had many passion projects that defined his legacy. One such project was the Robert Greene Ingersoll Birthplace Museum and the Freethought Trail. For those of you who aren't familiar, the Freethought Trail is a collection of 185 locations in west central New York that highlight locations important to the history of free thought. Sites can be viewed in person or through our highly interactive website, and there are sites that educate the public on lives of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Frederick Douglass, L. Frank Baum, Mark Twain, Susan B. Anthony, and many, many others. The Robert Greene Ingersoll Birthplace Museum was a particular love of Tom's. As mentioned earlier, Ingersoll was central to Tom's own journey to secularism, and it's very safe to say, I think, that Tom paid Ingersoll back in spades. It is believed that Tom nearly single-handedly helped to rescue the great agnostic from history. Tom doggedly worked to raise funds to make sure that we could save this museum from ruin, honestly, and to maintain Ingersoll's birthplace home in Dresden, New York. Shortly before his death, I had the great honor of working with Tom directly on a project that was very dear to his heart. He wanted to fund a permanent endowment for the Ingersoll Birthplace Museum so that it would be funded in perpetuity. Tom put up $40,000 of his own money just to make sure that we could match gifts from other people who were making donations, and it worked. So the museum is now fully funded. We will never again have to risk closing the doors to the Robert Greene Ingersoll Birthplace Museum thanks to Tom. And Tom was able to see this project to completion before his death, and it brought him just such great joy. He was so very happy to do this. During his career, Tom wrote and or edited several books. And of course, he is the author of The Trouble with Christmas. He's also the editor of the New Encyclopedia of Unbelief And he also wrote those 3 science fiction novels that Bill mentioned earlier. First one is Galactic Rapture. It's also known as the Messiah Games. The second is Nothing Sacred. And the last is called Behold, He Said. Collectively, these books are known as the Messiah Trilogy. You can find them on Amazon if you're interested. The last one's called Behold, He Said.
Behold.
Behold, He Said. Yes.
Oh, behold, he said.
Yes, Behold, comma, He Said is the name of the book. Tom was also the executive producer for the American Freethought documentary. It really is a fascinating TV documentary series on the history of secularism and censorship in the United States. If you haven't seen it, it's long. It's about 4 hours. I watched every minute. It was really fascinating. Yeah, it's really long. And it's great, though. And you can see it here on this website, AmericanFreethought.tv, and it's really worth watching if you haven't. Check it out. Tom was also, I'm sure this group knows more than any other group, a prolific writer for Frank Ari magazine. If you go online, you can find 345 articles, op-eds, book reviews written by his pen. He was also a researcher and presenter on topics related to secular humanism. He spoke to groups like this and at conferences across the country. Really, I feel that we're so fortunate to have these artifacts of Tom's life, to have his articles and his videos and his books. These are going to help us carry on his legacy at CFI. And if you'll permit me, I'd like to show you just a 5-minute talk Tom did at an American Atheist Conference on the rise of the Mormon Church into a world religion, even though Mormonism is, in Tom's words, just a bunch of bullshit. I'm going to show you just the last 5 minutes of this talk because it's 20 minutes long, but you can find it online if you're interested in seeing more. But I thought it would be a great way for us to kind of see some of Tom's academic work. Are you open to a 5-minute talk? Sure. Are you open? Let's go to, I'm going to go to right before the 16-minute mark, I think.
And his human hat,
That's probably good.
a little more than the King James Bible on the family bookshelf. What are we to make of errors in language like Alma and Helam?
That doesn't sound good.
Were you doing it Bluetooth before? How were you getting this before?
Yeah, it was Bluetooth. It should still be Bluetooth. See what happens.
Was buried. And the priests was not. They did not fight against God no more.
Let's see. See if we can switch ourselves.
Bring it closer to here just in case.
Maybe. We'll try that. Let me try that first and see if that works.
Of a rural lad who'd grown up with the King James Bible on the family bookshelf. What are we to make of errors in language? If we need look no further than the original Book of Mormon, the one printed under the prophet's own direction in 1830. Does it read more like the Word of God, or like the fakery of a rural lad who'd grown up with little more than the King James Bible?
See if I can switch the sound to the TV. So
He did show us volume. Yes.
Yep.
Did he come to believe in his own messianic pretensions? For proof, we need look no further than the original Book of Mormon, the one printed under the prophet's own direction in 1830. Like the Word of God, or like the fakery of a rural lad who'd grown up with little more than the King James Bible on the family bookshelf. What are we to make of errors in language like Alma and Helam was buried? And the priests was not. They did not fight against God no more. That all might see the writing which he had wrote. Teach repentance and baptism unto they. And this thing had not ought to be. I'll agree with that. Behold, I were about to write them all. So illiterate, so flawed was the Book of Mormon that as early as 1965, a scholarly survey revealed that there had been 3,913 changes since the first edition. Some of these represented changes in doctrine, others were needed just to bring the document to minimal standards of literacy. And of course, there have been further revisions since. 1965 was just the only time I know of that anybody had the intestinal fortitude to count them all. So much for Joseph Smith's claim that the Book of Mormon was the most correct of any book on earth. And yet, the saints believed. They suffered. Some died. They accepted intrusive control over their lives at the hands of their church. They made all these demonstrations of commitment, even though we know with psychological and historical certainty that the faith they believed in was false. In other words, we have proof from our own nation, in our own language, spelled out in documents that any of us can read. Proof that being radically, foundationally untrue does not prevent a creed from blossoming into a world religion. If the psychology is right, a creed that is 100% baloney can engage with adherents and grow up to be one of the world's major faiths. We know it can happen because the Mormon Church has done it and is still doing it before our eyes. If such a thing could happen among 19th century Americans who were moderately educated, who knew something about science and something more about standards of evidence, then why couldn't the same thing have happened among the downtrodden of the 1st and 2nd century Mediterranean world? If today's Mormon Colossus could grow from nothing but a tissue of lies, then it's possible to account for the growth and behavior of organized Christianity too, without needing to imagine that the stories told about its origins are true. Christian apologists have long insisted that Jesus must have been the Son of God. He must have worked his miracles and been resurrected from the dead, and so on, because so many of the apostles and other early Christians accepted martyrdom rather than betray their faith. Why would anyone do that, this argument goes? If these earliest Christians did not know with the certainty that only direct experience can bring that their beliefs were factually correct. Well, actually, historians now suspect that the number of early Christian martyrs has been greatly exaggerated. But this argument remains enormously influential. Among its prominent exponents today is William Lane Craig, America's foremost Christian debater. In one of his podcasts, Craig demanded, did the early Christians sincerely believe that Jesus was the Messiah because God had raised him from the dead? And here is how he answered. One good piece of evidence for this is their willingness to suffer terrible persecution and to die for the truth of that belief. And there's the classic apologetic case in a nutshell. And perhaps nutshell is just the right expression. Well, Mormon history gives us the tools to refute that claim. Mormon pioneers braved mob violence and aching privation. They struck off time and again into unforgiving wilderness. Many died. They did all these things even though many of them had been there watching firsthand as Brigham Smith and Brigham Young and Joseph Smith before him made it all up. If today's LDS Church can be accounted for without once imagining that there really were golden plates, then how much more confidently can we suppose that Christianity can be understood without any need to presume that there really was a Jesus, much less that he rose from the dead? Let's sum up. Yes, you can grow a world religion out of absolutely nothing.
The fact that it's
based on absolutely nothing will not deter early adherents from suffering and dying for it.
So the fact that
early adherents suffered and died for it is no proof that any religion is true.
If that is true for Mormonism,
it is no less true for Christianity.
Take that,
William Lane Craig.
And thank you very much.
So Tom's passing, I'm sure you all know, is a loss. It's such a loss to all of us. His wit, his intellect, his friendship, his contributions to the body of literature and secular humanism, free thought, it's just really devastating to everyone. As I was personally grappling with Tom's death, I came across an article he wrote in 2007 after the death of his mother. I'd like to share it with you today, as I think it helped me understand how Tom would have wanted us to approach his death. The article itself is called Dealing with Dying, Is Secular Humanism Enough? Tom writes, my mother died in 1995. She was Catholic. Though she suicided, there still followed the whole conventional round of open casket viewing, a memorial service at the funeral home, the funeral mass, and a graveside service. At mass, the priest endlessly conjured images of my mother in heaven. The mourners, mostly Catholic, seemed to draw comfort from the repeated denials of the reality that lay before them. A life snuffed out. Consciousness and memories and emotion and cognition annihilated. A pattern that had danced inside one skull for 64 years but never would again. No, the priest assured them, none of that was as it seemed. Somewhere behind my own immediate sorrow, I pitied those believers who were using their faith to do anything but deal with death. Believers say secular humanists live in a harsh, sterile world without hope. Yet I never heard anything more profoundly hopeless than a litany of dishonesties that passed for comfort at that Catholic funeral. People of faith often warned me, wait till you're having difficulties in your life, then you'll see that secular humanism isn't enough. Secular humanism not only sustained me through the loss of my mother, I believe it enabled me to deal with her death in a more authentic way than the believers around me. Because I didn't believe in God, I didn't need to wonder why my mother had more than her share of suffering in life. Because I didn't assume that the universe has an author who cares about our welfare, I could confront life's unfairness on its own terms. Because I disbelieved in immortality, I knew that my mother's passing was final. On the downside, I could deflect no pain by pretending that I'd see her again. On the upside, with no fantasies to hide behind, I had to dive in and cope with reality. Unbelief did far more than just get me through. It got me through better. So in conclusion, I just want to thank you again for inviting CFI to be a part of this remembrance event in honor of our good friend and colleague, Tom Flynn. Knowing that you are out here honoring Tom's life with us helps us get through this difficult loss better. We are grateful you are a part of Tom's story, and I am grateful to have had the opportunity to share this evening with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I wonder if you would introduce Ray.
I am happy to introduce you.
Ray, sit a little closer to everybody. So.
Back coming in through the Zoom, folks. Want to make sure everyone on Zoom can hear us too. I'm hearing just an echo. Can you hear it on Zoom?
People on Zoom are complaining of an echo.
Yeah, I'm hearing it too. Let's see here. I don't need to share anymore, right? Because I don't have anything else. If I get out, maybe that'll stop the echo.
Oh, that's right. You're not going to use any more video up there. Get out of here.
I'm gonna get out of here. I think that's a problem. Nice. I think that should do it. I love the Zoom meeting. I can leave that up for us. All right, I want to introduce Ray Lebowski, who is a friend of Tom's from Xavier University. And before that, Ray, were you friends? You can tell us, but a lifelong friend of Tom's, and he's going to say a few words for us.
Hello, thank you. Try here and see if that's any
All right,
close.
pick the closer one, yeah.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me here tonight. My name is Ray Lebowski. I'm an accountant in Cincinnati. I've lived here most of the time since I was 10 years old in 1966. I am Jewish by birth, if not by observance. And I wound up at Xavier for the most worldly of reasons. They offered me an academic scholarship. Like Tom, I was very much a fish out of water at a conservative Jesuit university like Xavier. And we met in one of those required courses, PL 220, Philosophy of Man. One day in the game room at the university center, we wound up playing pinball and talking about the class. And I refer to it as philosophy of man as opposed to philosophy of cows. And he just gave me a look and he goes, you know, that might be the first sign of intelligence I've seen on this campus. We instantly became friends and realized that very few other people were used to twists of language for which Tom was an acknowledged master. One thing I learned early on with Tom was that I could not really compete with him when it came to intellectual matters. He was just way better than anybody else. And the way to stick around was to, besides sharing his love of good alcohol, was to be a good researcher and a good editor. And I like to think that I helped on that. I was the person who would dig up those obscure facts that really ticked off the administration of the school. My favorite might have been when the university was talking about how it was trying to expand its recruiting base beyond Cincinnati, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Columbus, Indianapolis, and Louisville, and so that they were going to increase their presence in St. Louis. And I pointed out that at the time, Xavier had as many students from St. Louis as it did from the Republic of Panama. For some reason, pointing out facts was not something that the administration really liked. Tom soon had his own column in the Xavier News, half page on the op-ed page, which he frequently devoted to a half page to set up some outrageously bad pun. And of course, as an appreciator of bad puns, I sometimes contributed to this. One thing about Tom that most of the students did not understand is that if you were going to have a conversation with him, you had better bring your A game. And you had better be ready. You'd better be ready for twists of language. You better be ready to argue logically. We soon discovered and spent 4 years realizing that many of our students who had gone through the standard parochial school environment did not have an A game. They had been taught, you will think this, here are the answers, give those back to us. That was education. I realized this from the first class I took with Tom. He was that guy in the back of the room who asked questions that the instructor just was not ready to handle because they were genuine questions. He genuinely wanted to know, how did you get from point A to point B? The instructors, for the most part, especially in the required philosophy and theology classes, simply wanted you to get to point B and give that back to them. Reasoning was, I guess, left to the Jesuits, because they certainly weren't encouraging it from the students. So Tom's column in the Xavier News was called Our Man Flynn, after the 1960s movies, Our Man Flint. And he was the most unsecret agent-like person you would probably ever meet. Tom was very straightforward. He was not the most popular student on campus, given the paucity, let's say, of intellectual endeavor. Most of the people were there to pass 4 years and then work for their fathers or something like that. But Tom, changing subject a little, Tom took good ideas wherever he got them. He might be talking to the most bubble-headed person on campus, and if they said something interesting, he would research it, and we would get into it. And we had these. There was a small group of us referred to the Appalachian Social Justice Committee, which was not an official committee. None of us were from Appalachia, and it had nothing to do with social justice. It was just a name. And we would discuss these things, and we would hang out, usually in Tom's room because he had the best liquor. And it was fun. I mean, we were doing intellectual things, but we were having fun. And you couldn't say that about most of our classes. Most of our classes were of the, listen, write down, repeat variety. Tom also was on the radio at WVXU, which at the time was a 10-watt radio station. Yeah, the signal was so weak that the transmitter, which was on the WCET tower on Chickasaw Street in University Heights, could barely be heard back on campus, roughly 3 miles away. This was sometimes a good thing. There were things that went on as often happened at a low power radio station that you really didn't want to get into. In fact, there was what I refer to it as the night Tom ran. Tom was not exactly into exercise. We're in his room very late one night, and we had the radio on mainly for background and in case something interesting came up on what was called rip and read news, where you ripped the paper off the teletype and read it over the air. And somebody played a piece of music, I think it might have been by Frank Zappa, that contained a few of what George Carlin called the 7 words you can't say on TV and radio. Yeah. Tom starts running across campus towards the radio station. And I caught up when I said, just give me the keys. I was 60 pounds lighter then. And I go screaming into the radio station, take that off the air. They could have pulled our FCC license. This would not have put any of us at the radio station in good stead with the administration. So Tom was not a very popular person with the Xavier administration. And they finally cooked up a kangaroo court and brought him up on charges relating to a party we'd had on our floor our senior year, to which I was the only sober witness. Not because I was determined to be sober, but because I had a test the next day and it was my last semester and I really didn't want to fail it. Anyways, this kangaroo court was chaired by a gentleman who became prominent in Ohio politics later, an empty suit by the name of Ken Blackwell. Yeah, some of you may remember him, yes. Who openly called me a liar for testifying for being the only sober witness. So they sentenced him to a semester of not writing his column. Of course, we had anticipated something like this. And so a group of us just put our names on his column for the next 6 months. Rewrite it a little so it sounds a little more like your own stuff, and then go with it, because nobody wrote like Tom. All right. And making my way through his novels, which I will have to say, they are long. They are not beach reading kind of novels. You have to engage your brain fully in his novels because he is coming at you from a lot of angles. and I'm reading this, I'm going, it's long, but I said, I don't see myself putting it down very often. And in his magazine writing, the man was just brilliant. And I don't say that about very many people. It was just like every month when Free Inquiry magazine would come, I'd go, okay, what's he got this month? There were other writers on the magazine that I'd say, oh God, what is she gonna say this month? One in particular who, well, I'm sure will continue to irritate me. It's like, everything she writes, it all comes down to blaming white men, no matter what. Okay, let's see how she gets there this month. But with Tom's stuff, there was just always so much where you go, I didn't think of that. And it worked in reverse. Most of our contact in recent years had been by email, especially in my case, being a creature of the night for the most part. I'd think of something at 2 a.m. I didn't think that I'd be in good stead with Susan if I called him at that time. And I'd write on you go, I hadn't considered that. And I consider that the highest compliment you could get from Tom. I'll have to look into that. And I'd say, wow. I guess I did have my thinking cap on for that one. I came up with something that Tom Flynn had not considered. One of them may have been the whole title of his second novel, Nothing Sacred, because we used to do riffs on nothing. Not like Seinfeld on TV, but just on the whole concept of nothing. And I think that popped up later as one of his titles, and I said, okay. I said, I'm not considered a good influence on a lot of people. Maybe I had a good influence on this little part of it. And so I knew Tom for almost 48 years. And late one night in August, I was checking my various emails and saw the announcement from the Center for Inquiry. And it was just like, oh my gosh. I said, that's kind of like losing your crazy brother. You love the guy, you're not always around him that much, but it's a gap that's hard to fill. And I was very honored when I was asked to speak at his memorial in Buffalo, one of my old hometowns, by the way. And to meet these people that I've been reading about and reading their work for years. And, it was just such an honor, just like it's an honor to be here tonight. So I hope I filled in a few gaps. Oh, one last thing. Almost forgot one. The time our man Flynn supported a Republican for president. Okay. Okay. 1976. Gerald Ford against Jimmy Carter.
Okay.
Huh? Yeah. Tom, who was fairly left his whole life when it came to politics, not loony left, but left. It was the first time that I, of course of many, where I put his opposition to public professions of faith ahead of his own politics. He supported Jerry Ford for president. Kind of like some recent elections, we were going to lose either way, but he did support a Republican, and that showed me this is not a man who's politically doctrinaire. He put his own beliefs ahead of his own politics, and it was just one more example of why I love the guy. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I see a lot of pictures with the hammer. Do you really like the hammer?
MC Hammer.
Smashing the goldfish.
Oh, yeah.
That's it.
Is Does anybody want to introduce Bob?
I was going to ask, I know Bob prepared something to read and talk about, so why don't you jump in and then we'll participate. Anyone else who wants to get in there.
Okay. So, hi, I'm Bob Rieheman. I'm a former president of the Free Inquiry Group and one of the early members. Dear figures, as I remember Tom Flynn, the anti-clause and atheist activist, I must begin by paraphrasing his remark, buckle your seatbelts, here's Tom. Because Tom was exceptional in several ways. As author of The Trouble with Christmas, he became a charming, if somewhat eccentric, atheist personality during a public holiday devoted to a Christian theme. As editor of Free Inquiry, he used his position to clarify the social problems generated by a society steeped in religious tradition. And as author of science fiction, for example, Galactic Empire, he could offer clever and humorous critiques of the wider culture. About Christmas, he made my personal celebration of Isaac Newton's birthday, traditionally on 25 December, something of an event. I've met mathematicians and physicists from Europe who knew about this celebration. So thanks, Tom, for the kind words. As editor, I'm reminded of his comments about abortion, a major issue in Kentucky and source of continuing concern for me. As recently as last week, in the Catholic University where I teach physics and mathematics. In December 2020, he quoted his own work from 1989, quote, Roe v. Wade settled the abortion battles in the 1960s and 1970s in an unstable and ultimately undesirable way by judicial fiat. By enforcing a preemptive victory for those in favor of abortion rights, it brought the grassroots debate about the subject to a premature end. The important questions, such as when does a fetus become a human person, were never really thrashed out. So we arrive at today's situation where abortion rights exist only by court order because advocates never got the chance to build a broad-based constituency for them, end quote. While attending a course on Catholic saints offered by the theology department, to which I was personally invited, unsurprisingly, abortion became an issue when the Catholic social teaching on life and dignity of the human person was discussed. I copied from the stacks of the Thomas More University Library an article by Dr. Wayne H. Davis, a zoologist and fellow of the Kentucky Academy of Sciences, entitled Alternation of Generations, Man, that deals with the issue of personhood and the implication of biological facts to that inquiry. According to Wayne, who was a personal friend of mine, this article was used by the attorneys in the preparation of Roe v. Wade, though it is not cited in the judgment. Of course, my comments were dismissed, even though I quoted a scientific journal. Moreover, the instructor took such exception to my remarks that she wrote a direct response to them in the next communication with the class. She did the same regarding a disagreement in the second class. No one else received such treatment, I assure you. I can only say that Tom had correctly and precisely identified an issue for me as a scientist in a Catholic institution. Thanks again, Tom. And so we come to the third point, his humorous, in this instance, science fiction. Frankly, I find the humor helpful in getting through the day. I've little doubt that it was an important defense mechanism for himself. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Somebody.
No,
Okay. No? All right, well, in that case.
you want to do a figure out?
No, I
No.
thought so.
Okay, right, sorry.
In that case. So, as I mentioned before, this is a picture of Richard Ganulin. He's the former assistant city solicitor for Cincinnati. He took it upon himself to sue the federal government over its proclamation of Christmas as a national federal holiday in violation, he believes, of the First Amendment's Establishment Clause. In an editorial in Cincinnati Enquirer, Ganulin defended his suit by writing, "We are all burdened by the hypocrisy of a determination that the statutory establishment by Congress of a Christian holy and cultural celebration as a national legal public holiday does not prefer Christianity." For his effort, he has been pilloried in the press and received enormous amounts of hate mail from all over the world. Local federal judge Susan Jalot's dismissal of his case was written derogatorily in the form of a Dr. Seuss rhyming poem, making Ganulin obviously the Grinch, asserting, "We are all better for Santa, the Easter Bunny too, and maybe the Great Pumpkin, to name but a few." Her entire ruling was in rhymey couplets and Seussian. So I wrote that cover story for the local weekly publication, Everybody's News, asking whether Ganulin were really the anti-clause, not realizing that Tom had already taken on that persona up in Amherst, New York. Rick wasn't able to be with us tonight, but he wrote something for the event. I've cut out a lot of the legal language because it got kind of dense, but here's what he had to say. "I know Tom Flynn only by name and achievement, and what an achievement. Tom publicly tackled the sacred cow of Christmas Day, December 25th, or should I say, the elephant in the room. For that, Tom has my highest respect. He spoke publicly on behalf of the sacrificial lamb subjected to the governmental promotion of Christmas Day. Tom didn't whisper, he didn't email. He published a book authored in his own name. Bravo to Tom. The encore remains for whoever else is willing to act." I recall buying Tom's book, The Trouble with Christmas, which you have a copy of in your lap.
Signed by Tom.
Signed by Tom. Prior to or during the initial filing stage of my litigation. My loss is that I never met him. I seem to recall that Bill Messer invited me to a gathering with him, which I didn't attend. Tom deserves to be memorialized. He deserves even more to have action taken on his behalf. Bill asked me to share a few words about my own interest in exposing the fallacious legal premise of Christmas Day as a national legal public holiday established by the US Congress. The federal statute creates a national legislative preference for and benefit to Christianity, notwithstanding that the first words of the First Amendment are Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion. The federal statutory preference for a Christian celebration and the related ideological and concrete benefits for Christendom are unconstitutional. Any rational thinking person understands the logic. Any free-thinking person who respects equal rights understands the damage imposed on American society by the unconstitutional federal statute establishing Christmas Day as a national legal public holiday. In my view, both Christian citizens and non-Christian citizens benefit from the equality achieved by acknowledging that the US Congress cannot prefer a day of Christians' celebration. Yet, many Christians and non-Christians trivialize any questioning of the value and stature of Christmas Day. There's a cognitive dissonance when it comes to analyzing Christmas Day, but even otherwise rational thinkers seem unwilling or unable to embrace eliminating the ideological governmental preference. Characterizing the challenge to the establishment of Christmas Day as anti-clause is even itself understating the adverse effect on philosophical and religious equal opportunity in the marketplace, the so-called marketplace of ideas. Christmas Day is first and foremost about Jesus Christ, the Jesus Christ myth, and secondly, about the Santa Claus myth. Both are Christian myths. To paraphrase Bill, hard to read because I put my name in it. Are Santa, gods with training wheels. There's a public benefit to constitutional intellectual honesty. Having an exception to intellectual honesty for the establishment of Christmas Day as a national legal holiday is dangerous and an injurious slippery slope. If Congress can be intellectually dishonest with regard to Christmas, then it can be intellectually dishonest with regard to any other matter of importance to the citizenry and the welfare of the country. It can be intellectually honest, for instance, concerning Second Amendment jurisprudence. It can be intellectually dishonest addressing the autocratic proclivity of executive officers. Christmas Day is not generic theism. Moreover, the federal judiciary has proven wholly hypocritical and disingenuous as it decides questions like, "In God we trust," or "One nation under God." Going a little left here. In any event, the establishment of Christmas Day as a national legal public holiday is sectarian, not generic theism. The Mass of Christ Day is sectarian-based, not sectarian-neutral. When the government promotes one particular religion, its conduct is sectarian-based and is subject to judicial review, standard called strict scrutiny. Suffice to say, for the purposes of my few words here tonight, that the federal judiciary has never subjected the congressional establishment of Christmas Day, December 25th, to the proper legal standard of strict scrutiny. The Supreme Court has not decided this issue. Therefore, if organizations like FIG believe that the United States and its citizens benefit from a proper legal analysis exposing the fallacy of Christmas Day, then FIG should help persuade Congress to amend the federal statute, or can file lawsuits asking the judiciary declare the statute unconstitutional. Good luck in persuading Congress to amend, which leaves the lawsuits. So he wants to push us to action. And I'd like to add that our board member, Elaine Moskovitz, couldn't be here either. And yesterday she wrote to tell us her reason. She wrote, "Good morning, everyone. Unfortunately, I will not be able to go to the FIG meeting tomorrow or attend by Zoom. The ultra-Orthodox super Jews in my neighborhood are attempting to strike out the public accommodations section of the equality ordinance that we passed in 2020. We can't allow that to happen, and the council asked for advocates of the ordinance to attend the council meeting tomorrow." That's happening now. They want to make Gulf Manor a Hasidic enclave. Their quote, nonprofit buys up private real estate in Gulf Manor and then rents it out. The village loses necessary operating capital from lost property tax revenue. Nonprofit
You can say it.
She didn't say it. So
Oh.
I won't say it. I won't let that happen, Elaine.
Good job.
If you ask me, this is how we honor Tom Flynn. Thank you all for coming tonight.
Thank you, Bill.
And we still have half an hour before they throw us out.
Which we don't have to use if we don't want to.
Which we don't have to use if we don't want to. But, you know, I wanted to ask you, Ray, in your years since Xavier, you said you've known Tom for 40-something years, 48 years. And I'd like to put you back on the hot seat to talk a little more about interactions since Xavier, if you can. I've been told you have more stories.
I'm not 100% sure. My hobby is community theater, and I've taken smaller roles in recent years. I tell people I have CRS, which can't remember.
Stuff, can't remember stuff.
Yeah.
Is the microphone for here? So
It'll pick him up, but you should sit there. Yeah.
I'll put him there.
Okay, one story, this ties into the supporting Gerald Ford for president. And it also ties into Tom's column in the Xavier News. We were doing some kind of article, mainly Tom, of course. And it involves, I'm trying to remember the article. It basically involves the government declaring the clergy illegal. And what were these guys going to do for jobs? So we got involved with the idea of a Jesuit auto mechanic. And so we had something posed on a friend's Dodge Dart, and the friend was from New Hampshire. And as almost everybody knows, New Hampshire's state motto is live free or die. Somehow the administration decided that live free or die was a political endorsement. I'm not sure. And made us airbrush it out. That was the kind of thing that we dealt with on a regular basis. And to me as a non-Catholic, it was always, but the Jesuits are supposed to be the smartest guys here. These are supposed to be the brains of the outfit. And I said, then reminded me of a line in the comedy.
CRS.
Huh? Yeah,
CRS.
CRS. Yeah. And it was a Marx Brothers comedy, and he refers to Harpo as the brains of the outfit. That tells you something about the outfit. That was the kind of thing that we dealt with at Xavier. Another example, this didn't have to do with Xavier. When Tom lived in Milwaukee, he always had a thing for cities on the Great Lakes. Sometimes I wonder why. Erie, Milwaukee, Buffalo. Okay. I understand it takes a different breed to live in Buffalo, having spent my early childhood there. But he was working for the Multiple Sclerosis Society, and he was having trouble getting in to see the right people at the local companies to get donations. I said, well, try this one. Tell them you're from the Multiple Sclerosis Association. You're for it. Well, it doesn't say the Anti-Multiple Sclerosis Society, does it? Right. So he said he tried it. It wasn't anywhere where he thought he had a great hope of getting money, but when you're in fundraising, you'll try some. He says the guy I tried it on just laughed his head off and then wrote me a check. And later Tom would say, he says, I'm amazed I didn't think of that one myself.
Good. Yeah, good job.
Yeah. Let's see if I have anything else. We both served on student senate in college. This was one of those elected things where we were supposed to, defend student rights and all that kind of thing, where we really didn't have any rights. Tom, believe it or not, on that body and myself, we were centrists. There were people to the left of us. It just got crazy at the time, and even he acknowledged. He says, he'd go, "These people are crazy." I go, "Well, that's what some people think about you." And he didn't take it personally. He said, "Yeah, well, maybe I think a little differently." One thing I never knew until last month up in Buffalo, or maybe I'd forgotten it. I never knew how Tom wound up at Xavier.
Yeah.
And so I asked his even longer time friend, Adam Nair, who's also spoke up in Buffalo, he's known him since high school. He says, well, they had some things in their communication arts department that intrigued him. Tom would sometimes say, and then I got there and he says, I had no idea what I was doing there, but that was where he chose to make his stand. And the way it was good. On a large campus, Tom might have been perceived as just another crank. At a school like Xavier, he was a personality. There was nobody who was neutral on him. He was just that kind of person. You either really liked him or you really disliked him. And the dislikers probably outnumbered the likers.
Good sign.
Yeah, exactly. As I tell people, being in the minority does not mean you're wrong. Being in the majority does not mean you're right. It just means there's more people who believe that way. And Tom always fought that fight. No matter how much we disagreed, we'd have these long emails back and forth. I'd say, keep fighting the good fight, even if I don't agree with you on this particular subject, because he might have been the most honest person that I've ever known.
Mhm.
On the other hand, if you didn't want his honest answer, you should not ask him a question. I get accused of that myself, but I'd say I know people who carry this to a bigger degree.
What it was that you wouldn't agree with him about?
Oh, it would usually be things that he wrote in Free Inquiry. I'd say, okay, I'm with you up to here.
Mhm.
But at that point, I think you're misreading something, or I think maybe the reasoning isn't quite there. On the other hand, I would never accuse him of what I always accused the professors in college of doing. Here's the end point. How am I going to get there?
Mhm.
Which you see a lot in politics, or you see all the time in politics. It's like, I'm at point A, I want to at point B, and I don't care what's in between as long as I get to point B.
A priori.
Yeah. Right. My knowledge in that area is limited. They made us take 12 hours of philosophy, 12 hours of theology. One of my regrets is that I was never in a theology class with Tom. And I was in a couple of philosophy classes, and that was close enough, But theology, I said, oh, he's just going to have a field. He'd tell me his schedule for next semester, and I go, oh, you're going to have a field day with that one. You are just going to have so much fun. He says, well, why don't you get in that class? I said, what? I'm done with my theology classes. To give you an example of Xavier at its finest, my last theology class was a class called Old Testament Prophets.
Okay.
Being Jewish, I figured I might know a thing or two in this area, and certainly more than I knew about Catholic theology. It was taught by a nun whose every interpretation, of course, pointed towards Christ.
Mhm.
And she threatened to fail me in the class because I would not agree with her.
Yeah.
Yeah. that was fun, and that's just kind of how the school operated.
Mhm.
And the intellectual chaos that Tom brought for 4 years to that school was refreshing.
Yeah. That's good to hear.
Both Connie and I referred to similar things in our texts about that somehow the school did provide, Tom must have said this somewhere, did provide him with some tools for examining his own understanding of his feelings about religion and stuff.
Yeah, Tom was not an atheist when we started out. He did not officially become an atheist probably until the early 80s. And I remember with amusement, he'd give me updates on his efforts to get excommunicated. Yes, he was actively trying to get the Diocese of Erie, his home diocese, to excommunicate him. They didn't know how to handle anybody doing that. To the best of his knowledge, nobody had ever actively tried this before. He had his doubts, but one thing I will say for the Jesuits, unlike apparently most of the Catholic teaching orders, where it's here's the answer, give it back to us without giving you reasoning, the Jesuits encourage you to inquire, to explore, to research, to ask, and then they give you the answer. But I think he appreciated the fact that they gave you the tools to do your own research. They just didn't want you to give any other answer at the end of it.
They wanted you to reach the same conclusion.
Yeah, they wanted you to do all this work and get to a certain conclusion. But he appreciated the fact that they at least encouraged you to do your own research. I don't think they liked the fact that it wound up with him doing his own thinking, but at least part of the way he was following what they encouraged.
Very good. Thank you.
Yes.
If we don't, if we're anti-Christmas,
Mhm.
a bigger problem is the lack of taxing the churches.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Christmas is a problem, but it's such a minor problem to me that the amount of money you give to religion, I think that is just a vast problem.
I agree. On the other hand, and this is something that Tom and I frequently went back and forth on over the years, I said, sometimes you have to start out with the smaller victories.
Although I think that Christmas is pretty far.
Yeah, but you know, about 6 months ago, we had a discussion by email, and I expressed my frustration politically that the modern progressive operates on an all or nothing basis. All right, whether it's Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or whoever, I said they don't realize the value of getting what you want incrementally.
What's both sides?
Mhm. Oh yeah. You know, I don't excuse the other side, but this attitude of we have to get everything or nothing. I'm not going, no, sometimes you have to take it a little piece at a time. Back in the civil rights movement, they used the phrase eyes on the prize. You have to get a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. And Tom and I went back and forth, and sometimes he would say, isn't this worth, the big fight? I'd say, depends on what your ultimate goals are. I said, take what you can get when you can get it, and then move on to the next thing. And you may wind up getting everything you're aiming for. And the other side may not even realize it, especially when you're dealing with dummies.
One more story. I don't want to end on politics.
Thanks for saving. No.
We're gonna end on love because that's just my philosophy on life. And Tom was a loving man, and I don't think Tom loved me personally. We only met twice, but I know, having met him and having met people who knew him, that he just loved humanity. And we were fortunate to hear his wife talk at his memorial service. And I had just met her, and she just seems like the most beautiful woman. And I'm sure she wouldn't mind telling me this story because you're all so close to Tom, but she talked about their marriage and how important it was to her and how much she's just going to be devastated by his loss and how she is devastated by his loss and how they were just so happy together after all these years. And she shared with us, she called it a bombshell. She says, I'm a believer. Tom Flynn married a believer. Yes. And you could have heard like a pin drop in the room as she said this. And she said she was a believer and Tom respected her. He wouldn't go to church with her, but every Sunday she would get up and she would go to her church, whatever church it was, and he would stay home and just make her a lovely breakfast. Oh. And when she got home every Sunday, he would have breakfast ready and he would say, how was church? And she would say, fine. He would serve breakfast and he would say, and how's your imaginary friend? And that's Tom.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you all for having us here tonight. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much, Kat, for having us and for inviting CFI to be a part of this, and for Ray for coming all the way out to share stories with us. It's been a really great night to remember Tom Flynn.